Hello, everyone. This is Sophie Jennifer, and welcome back to my channel, Sophie Jennifer. Before we dive into today's story, I need to ask you something important. If you care about what is happening to American cities and the businesses that built them, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on what we are about to discuss. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand what is really happening in Chicago. Your support keeps this channel bringing you the truth. Now, let me tell you about a warning that should shake every major city in America. The CEO of McDonald's just stood before Chicago business leaders and said something that most corporate executives are too afraid to say publicly. Chicago is in crisis. Crime has made it nearly impossible to operate. Executives refuse to relocate there. Employees are fleeing. And McDonald's, one of the most iconic American brands headquartered in Chicago for decades, says their commitment to the city is no longer guaranteed. This is not a negotiation tactic. This is not corporate posturing. This is a billion-dollar company telling a major American city that they are prepared to leave. What you are about to hear is not just about one company or one city. This is about what happens when leadership fails and businesses have no choice but to walk away. Let me show you exactly what is happening. Chris Kempczinski is the CEO of McDonald's. He is not a politician. He is not trying to score points. He runs a publicly traded company with shareholders who demand results. In a speech to Chicago business leaders, Kempczinski delivered a message that cut through all the usual corporate diplomacy. Everywhere I go, he said, I am confronted by the same question these days. What is going on in Chicago? There is a general sense out there that our city is in crisis. Those are not the words of someone trying to be polite. Those are the words of someone who has run out of patience. He went further. It is more difficult today for me to convince a promising McDonald's executive to relocate to Chicago from one of our other offices than it was just a few years ago. Think about what that means. McDonald's has offices all over the world. They operate in countries with political instability, high crime, and poor infrastructure. Yet their CEO is telling you that convincing someone to move to Chicago is harder now than convincing them to move almost anywhere else. Top talent looks at Chicago and says no. They do not want to raise families there. They do not want to deal with what the city has become. When a global company cannot recruit executives to its headquarters, that company starts looking for a new headquarters. Kempczinski made one thing absolutely clear. McDonald's commitment to Chicago is not open-ended. It is not unconditional. As a publicly traded company, their shareholders would not tolerate that. This was not a subtle hint. This was a direct warning. McDonald's has a responsibility to its investors, its employees, and its customers. If Chicago cannot provide a safe and functional environment, McDonald's will go somewhere that can. And they are not alone in thinking this way. Kempczinski revealed that he has been receiving phone calls from mayors and governors across America. They are trying to convince him to move McDonald's headquarters to their cities. They see Chicago as vulnerable. They see an opportunity. They want those corporate jobs, that tax revenue, that prestige. Cities across the country are circling Chicago like predators sensing weakness. They know McDonald's is serious about leaving. They know this is not a bluff. And they are ready to offer McDonald's everything Chicago is no longer willing or able to provide. Lower taxes, better infrastructure, safer streets, a business-friendly environment, everything Chicago used to be and no longer is. In May 2025, McDonald's began shutting down locations across downtown Chicago. These were not failing restaurants in bad neighborhoods. These were downtown locations, high traffic areas, places that should have been profitable, but they closed anyway. Why? The Illinois Restaurant Association reported labor costs up 35% since 2020. Purchasing costs up 35%, fixed costs up 20%. Those numbers are significant, but they do not tell the full story. An outside source told CBS Chicago that crime and tensions with the homeless were the main factors behind at least one of the downtown closures. Let that sink in. McDonald's operates in some of the roughest neighborhoods in America. They have restaurants in cities with high crime rates all over the country. They have locations in areas where other businesses will not go, yet they cannot keep restaurants open in downtown Chicago. Not because of money, because the conditions have become intolerable. When you cannot operate a fast food restaurant in downtown Chicago because of crime, something has fundamentally broken. This is not about economics anymore. This is about safety. This is about whether a business can function at all. Kempczinski painted a blunt picture of what Chicago has become. He admitted it is now more difficult to recruit promising executives to McDonald's Chicago headquarters than it was just a few years ago. These are high-paying jobs, executive positions with one of the most recognizable brands in the world, the kind of opportunity that should attract talent from anywhere. But people are saying no. They do not want to move to Chicago. They do not want to deal with the crime, the taxes, the dysfunction. When a company cannot attract talent, its trajectory changes. Innovation slows. Growth stalls. The The best people go somewhere else and the company suffers. McDonald's understands this. That is why they are willing to move. In October 2025, McDonald's executive John Banner wrote an opinion piece that reinforced everything Kempczinski said. Chicago has seen a mass exodus of large companies. Office buildings now have a 25% vacancy rate. Job growth for 2025 ranks 48th in the nation. Moody's reported that the state has already slipped into recession. This is not a city on the decline. This is a city in free fall, and the people running it seem determined to make things worse. Banner also called out Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson for trying to impose a new head tax of $250 per employee per year on companies with at least 100 employees. The mayor called this pro-business because the money would supposedly fund public safety. Banner called it what it is: punishing successful businesses for creating jobs. Think about the logic here. Chicago has a crime problem. Businesses are leaving because of crime. So the mayor's solution is to tax the businesses that are still there. Tax them for every employee they hire, make it more expensive to operate in Chicago, make it harder to create jobs, and call it pro-business. This is not policy. This is extortion dressed up as reform. The businesses that stayed in Chicago, despite everything, are now being told they need to pay more just to exist there. And if they complain, they are accused of not caring about public safety. McDonald's is not a small company making noise. It supports 67,000 jobs in Illinois. It is a major employer, a major taxpayer, and a major part of the state's economy. When a company like that says the tax burden is unsustainable, you listen. Chicago is not listening. The history here matters. In 2018, McDonald's made a major commitment to Chicago. They moved into a new $250 million corporate headquarters in the city's West Loop. They left the quiet suburb of Oak Brook specifically to be in the city. And they said they wanted to connect with urban culture. They wanted to attract young talent. They believed in Chicago's future. 7 years later, they are prepared to walk away from that investment. When a company is willing to abandon a $250 million headquarters, the situation has deteriorated beyond tolerance. This is not about saving money. Moving a headquarters is expensive, disruptive, and complicated. McDonald's would not be considering it unless staying in Chicago had become untenable. The timing is important. Kempczinski made these threats publicly in September 2022. Conditions have worsened since then. Crime has not improved. Taxes have increased. More companies have left. Chicago had years to respond. They chose not to. Now McDonald's is telling them time is running out. And still the city does nothing. McDonald's is not the first major company to leave Chicago. 3 Fortune 500 companies fled in 2022 alone. Boeing sold its Chicago headquarters for $22 million after paying $165 million for it. That is a $143 million loss just to exit the city. Boeing did not care. They wanted out that badly. Caterpillar left after nearly a century in Illinois. A company that had been part of the state's identity for generations decided it was no longer worth staying. Citadel, run by Illinois' wealthiest resident Ken Griffin, took his $20 billion hedge fund to Miami. Griffin was direct about why he left. If people are not safe here, they are not going to live here. That is the simplest explanation you will ever hear. People will not live in a city where they do not feel safe. Businesses will not operate in a city where their employees are afraid. Griffin understood that. He moved his company and his wealth to a state that values both. The railcar company moved to North Carolina in 2023. More companies are preparing to follow. McDonald's listed other companies that could leave. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange is exploring options. Abbott Labs is watching. United Airlines is considering its future. These are not small businesses. These are major corporations that employ thousands of people and generate millions in tax revenue. If they leave, Chicago loses more than just jobs. It loses credibility. It loses its reputation as a place where businesses can succeed. Illinois is losing residents at an alarming rate. The state loses 1 resident every 9 minutes and 21 seconds. In 2023, 132,000 people left Illinois. Cook County alone lost 83,000. 64 of Illinois' 102 counties saw population decline in 2024. Meanwhile, Wisconsin gained 20,000 residents. Indiana gained 30,000. Iowa gained 10,000. Illinois is hemorrhaging people while its neighboring states grow. That is not a coincidence. People are leaving Illinois for states that offer better opportunities, lower taxes, and safer communities. They are leaving for states that function. Illinois does not. And the people who run Illinois do not seem to care. McDonald's has tried to make the relationship work. In September 2022, they announced they were moving their innovation center from the suburbs to Chicago headquarters. They called it Speedy Labs. It brought over 100 jobs to the city. Kempczinski said they were doubling down on Chicago while other companies were leaving. It was a show of faith, a public commitment. But even while announcing that investment, Kempczinski warned it was not altruism. It was a business decision that could be reversed if things did not improve. Things have not improved. Crime has not dropped. Taxes have not decreased. The business environment has not stabilized. McDonald's gave Chicago a chance. Chicago did not take it. Now the company is preparing to leave. Kempczinski identified three major problems damaging Chicago. First is crime, not just the statistics, but what he called the untold human impact. Employees do not feel safe walking to work. Customers do not feel safe visiting stores. Businesses cannot function when fear is constant. Second is the business climate. Illinois dropped from 26th to 36th in business tax rankings over 5 years. Infrastructure is deteriorating. Schools are failing. The state has $313 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. That is not a typo. $313 billion. The third problem is mindset. Kempczinski said Chicago is playing defense when it needs to play offense. The city acts like a victim instead of competing. Other cities are pursuing growth aggressively. They are cutting taxes, improving infrastructure, and making it easier to do business. Chicago is doing the opposite. It is raising taxes, ignoring infrastructure, and making it harder to operate. The city appears resigned to decline. Leadership acts like there is nothing they can do. Like the exodus of businesses and residents is just something that happens. It is not. It is the result of policy choices. It is the result of leadership failure. McDonald's wants better roads, better rail, better air transport. They want improved schools. They want lower crime. They want a plan to address the pension crisis. They want some indication that city leadership is committed to keeping businesses. Instead, Chicago proposes new taxes. Crime continues. Companies leave without meaningful intervention. John Banner wrote that downtown Chicago now has a 25% vacancy rate in office buildings. The former Groupon headquarters sold for $18 million, down from $110 million in 2018. That is an 83% loss in value. Downtown Chicago is emptying out. Buildings that once housed thriving companies now sit vacant. This is not recovery. This is collapse. McDonald's has options. They have been in Chicago since the 1950s, but they are not bound to the city. They already have operations in other states. They could move to Texas, which has no state income tax. They could go to Florida, where businesses are welcomed rather than taxed into submission. Tennessee, Arizona, North Carolina, all are possibilities. All are actively competing for businesses like McDonald's. If McDonald's leaves Chicago, it will not just be about the jobs lost. It will signal something larger. McDonald's is an American institution. If McDonald's abandons Chicago, other major companies will ask themselves why they should stay. The exodus will accelerate. More headquarters will relocate. More jobs will disappear. Chicago will lose what remains of its corporate identity. The company invested hundreds of millions in Chicago. They brought jobs, tax revenue, and prestige. In return, they faced rising crime, higher taxes, and a city government that refuses to address their concerns. Kempczinski's warning should function as a wake-up call. McDonald's has been in Illinois for over 70 years. When a company with that history and that level of investment threatens to leave, the situation is serious. Chicago does not appear to be responding. The mayor continues proposing new taxes. Crime persists. Companies continue to leave. The loss of McDonald's would be devastating for Chicago. Not just the headquarters jobs, but the message it sends to every other company watching. If McDonald's leaves, every major corporation in Chicago will ask the same question. Why are we still here? It becomes a cascade. One departure leads to another. The tax base shrinks. Services decline. Crime increases. More residents leave. The cycle accelerates until there is nothing left. McDonald's gave Chicago every opportunity. They moved from the suburbs to the city. They invested in new facilities. They brought jobs downtown. They tried to make it work. But patience has limits, and Chicago has exceeded them. The Golden Arches may soon be gone from Chicago. Another corporate presence preparing to abandon a city that refuses to address its problems. Another set of high-paying jobs that could disappear. Another piece of Chicago's corporate identity ready to vanish. Across America, mayors and governors are preparing their pitches. They are ready to welcome McDonald's with lower taxes, better infrastructure, and safer streets. They see Chicago's failure as their opportunity. And they are not wrong. The question is no longer whether McDonald's will leave Chicago. The question is when and who follows them out the door. Chicago had decades to get this right. They had warning signs. They watched other cities decline and could have learned from their mistakes. They had opportunities to reform taxes, address crime, and create a business-friendly environment. They chose not to. Leadership ignored the problems until they became crises. Now they are facing the consequences. Businesses do not leave cities because they want to. They leave because they have no other choice. McDonald's does not want to abandon a 70-year history in Chicago, but they cannot justify staying when the city makes it impossible to operate. Shareholders will not accept it. Employees will not tolerate it. Executives will not relocate there. The decision has already been made in everything but name. What happens next will define Chicago's future. If McDonald's leaves and the city does nothing, the decline will continue. More companies will follow. More residents will flee. Chicago will become a cautionary tale. A city that had everything and threw it away. But if Chicago's leadership finally wakes up, if they cut taxes, address crime, and make the city competitive again, there might be a chance. McDonald's might stay. Other companies might reconsider. The trajectory might change, but that requires action, not words. It requires leadership, not excuses. And so far, Chicago has shown no sign of either. So here we are. One of the most iconic American brands is preparing to leave one of America's greatest cities, not because they want to, but because they have no choice. McDonald's gave Chicago every chance. They invested. They stayed when others left. They warned what was coming. Chicago ignored them. Now the Golden Arches are preparing to leave, and they will not be the last. If you found this video valuable, subscribe to my channel, Sophie Jennifer, right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think. Should McDonald's leave Chicago, or does the city still have a chance? Share this video with anyone who needs to understand what is really happening to America's cities. The question is not whether McDonald's will leave Chicago. The question is what happens to every other company when they do. And nobody in Chicago seems ready to answer that question.